Welcome back to another Wednesday night program. Today we are starting a series on parenting, and we have invited Laura Richmond to join us to talk about this topic. Laura and her husband Sean have been doing seminars and counseling parents on this very topic. They are the founders of Antioch, New England. Parenting is hard. And so how do we, as Christian parents, foster children who are resilient and who have a strong faith and moral values when the world in which we live is at odds with our Christian worldview? Let's find out. So Laura, welcome to the program. I'm so glad that you have agreed to join us today to talk about parenting. So just tell me a little bit. You have 5 kids. Yes. And I've known one of those kids since our work. I work at Boston Trinity Academy and had the pleasure of meeting Sam, and who is a lovely young man. So awesome. You're doing something right.
Thank you so much.
I know you and your husband Sean are doing something right. But talking about parenting, I know that you and Sean have been talking on this topic and doing seminars on this topic for many, many years. And so I just kind of want to get your perspective. And parenting nowadays, it feels like, and I parented, a child myself. It feels like it's a lot harder now than it was, just in terms of the kinds of things that our kids are exposed to that that wasn't available. It just wasn't available when my child was little, and maybe when your oldest was little. Yeah. And so even, as we are entering this conversation, I wanted to start off just talking perhaps to couples who are thinking about having children, or perhaps, a couple whose child is on the way. And so what are the kinds of things that you would recommend, that you would suggest that the couple talk about before the child comes on the scene?
That's great.
So to speak.
And I want to start off by saying I'm honored to be here, and also just that my husband and I are not perfect parents, and we don't have perfect children. So but I'm speaking hopefully from a place of humility of what we've learned along the way. And we have had to learn some things the hard way. But I love your question about, starting from the beginning. I think that the biggest thing that I would say is working on your marriage. Your marriage is the foundation for what your kids are going to get. And I definitely think that, Sean and I tried to work on our marriage before, and then once you start having kids, it brings out everything, So there's no way to have a perfect marriage ever, but there's no way to have it perfect before you start. Yeah. But I would say working on yourself, allowing, being open to God teaching you. Yeah. Personally, your self-awareness, and then how you relate, I'd say are the biggest things. And then I would also say is begin to explore like parenting styles even, or look for mentors. That was one thing I was thinking about in preparation for this, is just the importance of mentors that has been in our own life. I can look back and point to people that were very intentional with Sean and I, that we modeled our families after. Yeah. And I don't even know what we would have done without them. We both had good parents, but we also needed those mentors. Yeah. So working on your marriage, finding mentors, beginning to explore what kind of parenting style you're gonna. Yeah.
So guys, if you haven't seen the marriage series that I did, yes. A perfect plug for the marriage series videos that we just did. We finished it out last week. So obviously, that's an important piece. So we just ended it. And I felt that parenting was sort of the next just perfect transition from having spoken about marriage to then talking about parenting. I felt like, they just dovetail so nicely together, and so many things, right, kind of correlate with one another.
Absolutely.
And so the fact that you just said to work on the marriage first, and one of the things we talked about is if you have a strong marriage, and that's the key, then you can kind of
Yeah.
work on the other stuff.
Yeah, because when you're parenting, you want to parent the same way. You don't want to be sending mixed messages to your kids, because then it's really chaotic if you do, and we have done that at different times. And just realizing that importance of, and you are going to disagree,
Right.
and so how are you going to resolve that while being a parent at the same time?
Right.
So you have to, and you will, like we said, building the plane in the air. You will have to work on your marriage simultaneously, but also doing it beforehand is also important.
Yeah. So I want to dig in a little bit into that, because I have seen, couples who are trying to parent their child, and it's almost like they have to go back to a reset and decide that they're going to be on the same page as to how they parent. Because at this point, the child, and maybe that's your experience watching, at this point, the child has a different relationship with either parent, right? There's a parent maybe who is more strict, and there's a parent who perhaps is less strict.
Yeah.
And so they play, kids are not stupid.
Yeah, they
right?
do. They get it.
They play the parents sometimes against each other. And so, even in those situations, what are some things that we can, if that's the case for a couple, what can they do at this point, to kind of get on the same page? And obviously, there may be things that were going on in the marriage that led to kind of this difference in parenting anyway. And so, I don't know, it's kind of it's a hard question.
That is a hard question. I think in the moment, I would say, if you're in a situation with your child, and in the moment you have two different ideas of what whatever parent that is administering the, I don't know if it's discipline or whatever is happening, I would say don't publicly shame the other parent or correct the other parent. Save that for the bedroom. Save that for at a different time and talk about it. Just because you want the kids to experience a united front. And like you said, they are perceptive, but I think having a united front is important. And then talking through those differences at a later time is what I recommend. Of course, if there's like an abusive situation going on, that's totally different.
Right.
But I think if there is just a difference of the way, like, I wouldn't do that. And I've made this mistake. Believe me, I've made this mistake of and my husband, of course, of just in front of the child saying, I don't think you should do that or whatever. And that just really does confuse the child.
So having those types of conversations where even if you disagree with your husband or wife on the way she's handling a particular issue, not airing it out in front of the children. And then taking it back, when the two of you are alone, and then addressing it, how perhaps you might do that in the future. Okay.
And sometimes that's really hard, because sometimes you really do have very different opinions. Sometimes you have to go to counseling and kind of figure out, why are we so different, and how can we get on the same page?
Right. So do you recommend, and this is something else that came up too in the marriage series, that sometimes you need an outside therapist or a counselor to help the marriage, or to help in parenting.
And I think that can be on different levels. It could be a therapist, a counselor, a pastor. Sometimes it means educating yourself by reading books or going to conferences. So I feel like there's so many ways to get on the same page. Just as I talked about earlier, a mentor couple. We have gone to our different mentor couples over the years and said, help us here. So there's lots of ways to figure that out.
Okay. Well, let's go back a little bit to what the Word says, right, about what parenting is like and what teaching our kids is like. And so let's look at Proverbs 22:6, and I think this verse is going to be very familiar to a lot of you. And it says, train up a child in the way he should go, even when he is old, he will not depart from it, right? And I think a lot of us as parents, you know, this is the ideal. This is what we want, especially sometimes parents who see their kids perhaps when they become teenagers or 18 on early 20s who leave, right, the church.
Right,
and we hope, you know, that training will come into play. I know the Lord has a plan and, you know, he's going to bring him back. And I know there are a lot of situations, you know, that way. But as we're looking at parenting and you know, training our kids, I want to look at from a developmental level. And I know you mentioned you have done a lot of study on neuroscience. Is that right?
Yeah, you know,
sort
a little
of the development.
bit.
The development of kids, and sort of from even that early age, right? How do we train those little itty bitty kids?
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. My husband and I, especially in the early years, we still have a 13-year-old, so we're still, you know, we're still getting ready to launch for a few more years, but we would always look at each other and say, good parenting is hard work. And it's funny when people would say, your kids are great, you know, like they just turned out that way, but you know, we both knew, like they didn't just turn out this way. They took a lot of work, and so, you know, one of the words that I want to say is intentionality. And we have another phrase is if you don't train your toddlers, then you'll have terrible teens. And the reason for that goes back to train up a child in the way he should go, because you know, as I began to learn about neuroscience in the last few years, you know, they've really discovered that we build these little pathways in our brain called neuropathways, and you know, they start really young, and it's interesting. I have a granddaughter now, and so I've been doing a few of the things that I did with my kids when they were the same age. And one of them is just starting to train them in little things. And so I would say, and I'll come back to that little training session in a minute, but I would say that we started with our kids as young as we felt like they could comprehend what was going on, which is around 9 months, I would say. With all our kids,
so very early.
We started noticing that, you know, they would maybe get near like a cord or a plug or something, and we didn't want them to touch it, right? So we would start to say no, or show them, like, you know, this is not for you here, and, you know, use some kind of corrective language, and they would get it. And so we realized, oh, they know what's going on at this age. And so, and, you know, we learned through our own experiences, through our mentors, and of course through the Word, the importance of I want to say training. Well, we use that word in the Scripture, but training, it's not the same as correcting, right? Training and teaching is instructing your kids and showing them, like, this is what we do, right? And then you have to correct it.
Right.
You have to correct it, and as you begin to teach and train them, and then correct the behavior that doesn't follow along, it begins to build those neural pathways, and it's cool. And so, you know, just an example is I was teaching my granddaughter not to throw her sippy cup off the high chair, right? And so she just wants to, you know, take her drink and then just throw it on the high chair, which every kid does this, right? But that is actually an easy way to start teaching your kid to do what you ask them to do. And, you know, children obey your parents, and the Lord, for this is right. And so we taught our kids early to obey what Mommy and Daddy said. And so she wanted to throw it off, and I put it on there, and I said, no, don't throw the sippy cup. And she looked at me, and she went like this, and she tested me, right? And I said, put it back, and I said, don't throw the sippy cup. And she did it again, but eventually she looked at it, and I said, no. And she went like this, and then she pulled her hand back. And so that showed me she could learn, and she did learn, right? And so as your kids, they learn that process of obedience and they learn to respond to your voice, it becomes ingrained in them. This is right. This is what we do.
Yeah.
And that's part of the training,
Right.
part of the training process.
Right. Right.
And I think, that goes hand in hand with this emotional piece. So it's not just about the rules, but it's part of it. So when our kids are young, they don't understand the nuance, right? They don't understand if it's either things are either right or wrong, right? When you're 0 to, I don't know, 5 or 6. And so it's not like they can just decide for themselves, right? So that's why we have to help them. But as they grow, and of course, as little babies, we love them. But as they grow, they begin to want to obey out of their love for us, right? And so it's just that nurture piece is just as important as the training piece. And so I think sometimes as parents, we think, well, we've got to just train our kids and this and that. But actually, connection, and I know one of the buzzwords right now is attachment, right?
Yeah,
but that emotional connection is just as important. So we really have to think of it. And I kind of think of it as grace and truth. You know?
Right.
They need the truth, they need the grace. And that's a very biblical concept. So that's something that we have really tried to, and even in the midst of how we train our kids, trying to stay emotionally connected with them at the same time.
I mean, I have so many things going through my head right now as you were talking. Because, and I haven't, well, the first thing that came to mind as we were talking about training, because the way you were describing instructing your granddaughter, I began to think, well, maybe is the training of that word, is that the same as discipling? Right?
I think so.
Is that the same root
I think
word
it
for
is.
discipling? And then I thought about Jesus and I thought about God, and then you talked about, sort of teaching us, right?
Yeah.
And guiding us in the way that we should go. Right?
Yes.
That he's parenting.
Yes.
Oftentimes parenting us in the way that we should go to model our lives and to be more and more like Christ, right? And so I feel like there are so many parallels between what parents are doing with their kids in the same way that God is doing with us. And as you say, right, we need to, as parents, build the connection with our children, because that's what God is doing. If we didn't love God, right, we obey out of love for God, and kids obey the parents out of love for God. So I had all of these things
that is so
connections
good
in my head, because, and so I guess if we think of it in that way, think about parenting our kids in the same way that God parents us, in the way that we should go. Maybe it'll take on kind of like a different light in many ways.
And when I was parenting young kids, one revelation that hit me was, I am the representation of God to my kids. Sean and I are.
Right.
And you hear about so many people, and all of us actually have misunderstandings and misperceptions of God's character because of our parents. And I had wonderful parents, but they weren't perfect, and some people have had horrible experiences, but that's a heavy weight, isn't it? And I think there's so much grace for us to be growing and changing into God's image all the time as we're parenting, but for us to realize, like, however I am to my kid, that's what they're going to think about God until they're older.
Right.
And they can kind of sort through, like, oh, that was my mom, and that was, my mom was not godly in this point, and I can separate that from who God really is. But that's powerful as we think about how we disciple our kids. So it was just like all of those thoughts as you were talking. I was like, Lord, this is perfect. Yes, I can see that. You talked about some of the development, again, the neuroscience and building these neural pathways, right? As we are teaching them. Talk to us about how parents
can continue as the kids age, continue in different areas, right? Because you can be teaching them sort of kind of like training them what not to do, but maybe some other ways in which, you know, parents can take an active role in those neural pathways. What are some other things that they can do?
Yeah. Well, I like to, you know, the progression of, you know, 0 to 18 or whatever. I like to just think of, you know, those 0 to 6, it's very much instructive, you know, and then I would say like 6 to 12 is more of, it's still very instructive, but it's much more of a partnership, maybe, so to speak. And then the 12 to 18, it's more of like a coach, you know, and especially I would say from like, you know, 15 to 18. And yeah, I just think that, you know, 0 to 6, you're really telling your kids what to do. 6 to 12, you're still telling them what to do, but you're asking them more questions. And I think, you know, that gets, as they get older, the 15 to 18 or whatever, just depends on their maturity, honestly. You're asking them questions, but you're really letting them take more leadership, so that by the time they're out of your house, it's definitely more of a coaching. You know, you're not necessarily offering your advice all the time, kind of thing. And so, let me get back to your question. Maybe you could re-ask that question again.
Well, in fact, I sort of want to talk with you about those particular stages and sort of what they look like. As you're saying, you know, 0 to 6, it's more instructive, and then 6 to 12, right?
It's more. I think it's more of a partnership. So
a partnership.
So it's kind of like a dance. You know, you go this way, I go this way, and so you're learning your kids. You're finding out more of like, how are you made? You know, my 13-year-old is a soccer player.
Puberty's right in there.
Oh yeah, which is crazy, right? But yeah, you're beginning to see who they are, and you're really trying to help them flourish. So, you know, in many ways, it kind of turns to like a servant role of like, how can I help you become who you are? And you know, the hope and desire is that you've already laid those foundations to where you're not putting out fires all the time. So this is what happens to a lot of people as they get into those teenage years, and they're having to put out fires all the time. Or tween. I guess we're not really talking the teenage years. So, yeah, really with the 6 to 12, you're really holding their hand. You're walking alongside of them. It's still very, you know, you're very much close together. Involved in pretty much everything that's going on in their lives. But then, and you're still nurturing who they are. You're actually still discovering, I would say, in that 6 to 12, helping them discover, like, you know, getting them involved in different activities, or trying to see what inspires them, what motivates them. You know, what inspired my firstborn daughter is completely different from my last-born son. And so, you know, it's just fun. And and then by the time they're teens, it's really, you're in more of that servant role. Like, how can I help you grow in this? You know,
to coach them.
Coach them. Yes, it's really interesting. You know, something I encourage is just parents to really understand their giftings. You know, if you do have a spouse, like my husband, I would say he's a little better with the teens, and I'm a little better with the littles. He just he's a great coach, meaning like, not like he is a great coach for sports too, but yeah, he's a great coach with teens. He was a youth pastor before, and so sometimes I'm like, you can do this, and I'll do the littles. But yeah, so it does just take a different, and I think sometimes parents, a mistake that, you know, we make sometimes is we forget that this transition has happened, and our kids don't need us to be instructive, but they need us to be like cheerleaders, you know? And of course, we'll always have, as long as they're in our home, we'll always have that like instructive part, but it really does change. And if you've done it well, you know, if you've slowly released the rope, then hopefully they are able to make good decisions, you know, and you can affirm them and bless them and find out how to support them.
What is the role of kind of guiding them in Scripture? You know, what are some ways to begin to talk with them? And, you know, if we are assuming, right, that the parents are bringing the kids to church or maybe to Sunday school, but in the home, you know, what role can parents take with their kids?
Yeah, that's so important. And going back to the training up a child in the way he should go, I think that, well, first of all, I would say modeling is the most powerful tool in your toolkit. And I should have said that earlier. But, you know, I'd say for your kids are gonna, if you're living a life that they see is glorifying to God, you know, if you're an authentic believer, and you're not going to be perfect, right? But if you're living a life where you know, have a regular time where you read your Bible and you pray, they're going to see that. So first of all, I'd say that is the most important thing. I think that there's different ways to get it in, right? I've seen families have regular devotions, and I feel like for some people that's like I don't want to say heavy yoke, but some people feel like, oh, I can't do that. But I think for us, what was important is to teach our kids to have like a regular personal devotional time. Now, like, is a 2-year-old going to do that? No. And so what we started off doing was having regular Bible time, like reading our Bibles with them every day, like a children's Bible, right? And then they transition to being able to read. And so we would say, let's have our time with Jesus every day. We did try to have devotions. I can't say we were the best, but I think having like dinner times, we would pray, or we pray for certain things. Sometimes we would bring in like a certain devotional, and then I think also just on that modeling piece, if you have like a authentic relationship and with your spouse of going to Jesus and talking about, you know, your relationship with it. What is he saying to you? What is, you know, and then also with your kids, having those regular times like of prayer, you know, for example, we would tuck our kids in at night. We'd pray over them. So at different points in our relationship, things like scripture, prayers would come out just as an outflow of our own relationship with the Lord. And so I would say like some people are really good about having regular schedule, doing the same thing over and over. That's great. Some people are, you know, stronger in being more spontaneous and, you know, just, so I think there's room for both. But having a real relationship with the Lord is the best. And then of course, you know, like you said, having your kids at church, having opportunities for them to be around godly people who are going to speak truth.
So let me ask you, Laura, and this may be, you know, this is a hard question because I think, you know, parenting is hard, right? And we know that we're going to make, you know, parents are going to make mistakes. I know I certainly made a lot of mistakes, you know, with my daughter. But what do you say to, you know, to parents or, what do you say to parents whose kids, right, have gone a little bit off of, you know, the path in
Sure.
some ways, or maybe they're being rebellious,
Yeah.
you know, toward the parents. You know, is there something that the parents can do to fix their relationship? Because sometimes it may be a relationship issue between, right,
Sure.
the parent and the child.
Sure.
It doesn't always have to be something external that's going on with the kid. It may just be like an interpersonal rebellion that's happening there. So if it's in those instances, you know, what do you say to
Yes.
parents whose kids are
Yeah.
just, you know, being rebellious and they don't want to hear from their parents, and
Yeah.
particularly the teenage years can be so
Absolutely.
difficult.
Yes.
So, you know, what is your you know, what are your ideas on that and what parents can do?
Yeah. Well, I think there's no easy answer.
Yeah,
You know,
right.
no easy answer to that question. And, you know, I think we've all been there with our kids where there's always like a little something there that needs to be resolved, be it small or large. You know, my husband and I, we've talked a lot about parenting, just both of us through the years, but to a lot of people. But I think one of the biggest things that we would say is you always have to stay in a place of humility. And so we have apologized to our kids over and over for dumb things that we said or did or whatever, you know, hurt their feelings, just responded wrong. You know, so many things, just mishandled a situation for whatever reason. And so I think, you know, the easy, simple answer is humbling yourself, you know, first before the Lord. And, you know, if there was something that you did wrong, repent before God. And so that goes back to you and God. And, you know, like I said, there's no simple answer to your question, because it might mean that you need to go through counseling. You know, it might need that you need a mediator, or you know, it might mean that you bring someone else in. But that does start with humility. So humbling yourself before God, and then humbling yourself before your kids. Like I feel like, you know, so many times we apologize to our kids for things, and kids are great about forgiveness. They're just like, you know, most of the time, unless there's just been like a pattern of hurts over time. You know, sometimes it is harder for kids to forgive, but I do find that kids are very forgiving. And when you apologize to your kid and they forgive you, it's like, you know, it's like everything can just start over. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, and that is what Jesus was. He was a humble man. You know, so that is the way that we. And I find that when we're humble, if we're humble parents, our kids want to follow Jesus. They do, because I mean, nobody wants to follow somebody who's proud. Usually kids rebel. I find that if you're a proud parent, you know, there's something that is off-putting to kids.
And you know, I'm so glad you said that, because, you know, in my own personal experience, and here I'll share a little bit about what I went through with my daughter. We went through this really hard season, and I basically, God kind of had to show me that I needed to be humble. And sometimes I think we want to parent, we feel like we can change the kids, you know, and this is something else too that we talked about in marriage. Like you know, a spouse feels like they, you know, if they nag enough, that you'll make your spouse change, or you'll make your kids change. And it doesn't work that way. It makes them rebel even more. And so I, you know, I got into that pattern myself, thinking that I, you know, if I nagged enough, or if I got on her case enough, then maybe something would change. But it was just frustrating her, frustrating me, and damaging the relationship. And so, you know, it was a what they call a come to Jesus moment. Because God had to humble me and to recognize that, you know, I could not change her, that the Holy Spirit was going to be the one to do the work, and that my job, you know, in my daughter's case, right, and as you say, every case is different.
Right.
In my daughter's case, I just needed to love her.
Yes.
I just needed to love her. And so once I did that, and it hasn't been like a smooth sailing, but something changed in their relationship.
That's good.
Something changed in their relationship. And so, you know, I really love that you said that, because I think sometimes we miss that piece, that we have to ask for forgiveness, that we need to be humble, that we need to recognize too the work of the Holy Spirit in their own lives as well.
Yes.
And that, you know, we can train and we can guide and we can do what we can do, but God is going to do the work in their lives.
That's right.
And God is the one who's going to kind of, you know, just...
Yeah. Well, and humility brings us to a place of agreeing with God's plan. You know, it's like we take ourselves out of it. We lower ourselves enough to, and so, like you said, then He can have His way.
Yeah.
As you were talking, it made me think of something else, and I just wanted to mention, and I talked a little bit about the nurturing of the emotional part of your child, and when you talked about, I don't know if you used the word accepted, but it made me realize that acceptance is an emotional need. And so when we're humble, and we can not just sort of think of ourselves in one sense, we can see what our child needs. And I think that is one of the biggest things, is recognizing what our kids need. And that takes some practice. You know, it takes some stepping back and thinking. Sometimes my husband and I would talk and pray about the different personalities of our kids, and say, like, you know, this child acts this way, and, you know, different from this child. And so what is it that we think that they need? And so then we would say, well, I think that they need more attention, or more acceptance, or approval, or, you know, these different needs that we all have. But some kids have more, you know, they have more of a need for comfort, or more of a need than another kid. And so really even thinking through that.
Yeah. I really love that word. I think all of us crave acceptance.
Yes.
Right. And I think for kids, right, the first people that we crave acceptance from is our parents.
Huge.
And so
huge.
You know, to be able to give that to our kids, I think is key.
Yes.
To helping them too, right, in their own personal growth.
Yes.
As they're kind of trying to figure out who they are and accepting themselves.
It's so huge, and, you know, psychologists will tell you it all goes back to your childhood, and it really all goes back to your parents.
Yeah, right.
And that, again, it's like that. We are the first people that they get all these life experiences from, and we're not perfect.
Yeah.
But this is why we're having this broadcast, is so that, you know, it'll help us begin to think about, like, what do my kids need, and how. And, like, the thing about needs, and we don't have to go too deeply into this because I have a whole teaching on needs, but the thing about needs is that sometimes we when we even think about our own needs, is we think they're wrong. Like, I shouldn't have needs. But we all have needs, and they're not good or bad. And it's the same for our kids. It is what it is. And so it's up to us as their parents on those emotional needs to fill them. Eventually, you know, it's like the weaning process. Eventually, they're going to have to learn how to meet their needs, get their needs met in the right way.
Right.
In the right way. And that's, you know, part of their relationship with God and the relationship with others. But we help them as parents to meet those needs.
Let's talk a little bit about respect. Right. Because one of the things that I've noticed now, my own cultural background is Latino, and respect for elders is you know, very big. But not to say that, you know, the Anglo culture is not the same, but I feel like when it comes to and you can correct me if I'm wrong, when it comes to parenting, at least we may have gotten into a pattern where it was more important to be your kids' friends than like an authority figure. And I honestly don't know if that continues to be an issue nowadays with kids not having that level of respect for their parents that they used to have, or even that in some other cultures, kids express, and I suppose it's not like an either or. Either you respect me, or I'm your friend, right?
Right.
It
right.
can be both.
Yeah.
It can be both.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about that. I don't know if you have those conversations with parents, who are trying to like figure that out.
Well, that's interesting. I actually come from a more of a Southern culture, so I do come from a little bit more of that background. Plus, I'm 54, so I think it's a little more. In I grew up with more of a respectful culture, so to speak. So that is more my paradigm. I think that if we look at healthy authority, it is in the Bible, right? And God is our authority. And, the Bible does talk about submission and, all these things that we won't get into all of that right now. But I do think there is a very healthy authority structure. And I think, as believers, we're always trying to find it because we've got, like you said, we've got culture saying one thing and the Bible saying another. And we're always trying to interpret what does that look like, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it can look a little different for different people, but I think that as far as parenting goes, it's very clear that parents are the authority because it says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right." And then as we get older, we honor our parents, right? We kind of turn it around, and so I think that it's not Jesus. He demonstrated that he's our servant, right? So it's this dichotomy of like God is in charge, but Jesus serves us, and I think that's what we're supposed to be like as parents, right? So it's the we are the authority that washes our children's feet, so to speak. We are in charge of them, and we and they, for their own sakes, they need to learn obedience in order to have a life that flourishes. It's interesting. I see a lot of kids who are confused about like who they are,
their identity and gender issues,
purpose, and I think it's because they haven't had those foundations built. I feel like kids are more secure when they have the rules and the relationship. I think I've shared with you before we started, there's a little phrase that we've always said, rules without relationship leads to rebellion. And so if you have one without the other, you're gonna be lost, is what I feel like. And I think we see that in our culture. We see a lot of kids who are lost. They haven't been given any kind of foundation. And I think because there hasn't been healthy authority in their lives. It's either harsh authority or no authority.
Right. So it's sort of extremes in either direction. But I keep coming back to, and I don't know if maybe it's the Holy Spirit, kind of this idea of healthy authority and our own relationship with the Father, right? And this idea that in Scripture there's biblical evidence for being a friend to God and being a friend of God, right? So here is this authority, in heaven, who rules over everything, who created us in His image, to whom we obey, and in with whom we have relationship, but who also wants to be our friend, right? So it's this both and relationship that the Father has with us, including that of servant in the form of His Son, Jesus Christ, right, who washes our feet. And so it's painting this beautiful, for me, relationship of what our parents and the model that God already has in Scripture with the relationship He has with us, and what is his model
Yes.
for parenting our children.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And so as we just have been discussing this, it's, these beautiful images of
Yeah.
the Father's modeling of his relationship with us that
Yeah.
we can have with our children.
Absolutely.
Those healthy relationships.
Absolutely.
So it's just beautiful.
Yes, that's good.
As we've been talking. Now, I want to turn our attention to, we have about 15 minutes
Okay, great.
left, but I want to talk about technology.
Okay.
This has been such a huge topic in the media.
Yes.
We talked about it in some episodes back. Its impact on mental health of our kids,
Yes.
specifically. And so, so talk to me about, and I don't know, maybe your youngest child is the one having
Yes.
to deal with this, sort of the technology piece as he's growing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what is your philosophy around technology? And maybe is there anything that you could counsel parents who are watching,
Yeah.
around technology?
Yeah. Yeah, I as you said, I have 5 kids. My oldest is now almost 28, and my youngest is 13. So it's 15 years, and like right in the middle of just technology, just going like wildfire. And so, definitely, my 28-year-old, what she experienced is different, not completely different, but different from my 13-year-old. And I think for sure with my 13-year-old, it's like you're pushing back the fire. I mean, I just feel like, the whole world is on fire and you're trying to like hold it back,
Right.
with a fire hose or whatever. A little bit, with my 28-year-old, I felt like I could have boundaries and it was easy, I mean, never easy, but boundaries around technology. For example, she and her sister got their first phones when they were senior and junior in high school, and they shared it.
Right.
And it wasn't smart.
The flip phone.
Now my 13-year-old, all of his friends have a smartphone.
Yeah.
And so our philosophy has been hold them back from as much technology.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to come back on this one because, anyway, hold them back from as much technology as possible while living in the real world. So it's almost like the Bible verse, living in the world but not of it, right? Yeah. And I think that the reason I say that is because, as we've all noticed, we all have smartphones, but the tendency of technology to take you out of your own reality, and there's a lot of research that's been coming out about the way it changes our kids' brains, and one of the biggest things that I read recently is that it creates children who are not as empathetic. I don't know if you've heard that or not.
Yeah.
And I just think that's because they're not living in reality.
Yeah.
They're kind of living in a virtual reality, right? And so they're interacting with people that aren't like, they are real people, but they're not in real life, but they call that IRL, in real life.
Yeah.
And so our goal is to have our child have more in real life experiences than on cell phones or whatever. And so we have just different not rules, but just I guess rules, but just how much screen time can you have? So it varies, like from the weekend to the weekday. Also, I think just helping your kids find things that aren't video related. So, one example is I have this little deck of cards that have like creative questions on them. And so with my son, my husband's been out of town, and so with my son at dinner time, we've been asking each other the questions. And it's actually kind of cool because I'm getting to hear things about him, and he's getting to hear things about me that we normally wouldn't just share, like who's been the most inspirational person to you, or things like that. So I think for us, trying to help our kids think of like, what are things that are not associated with the screen that you can do? Yeah. And then a lot of times just saying like, hey, we're not doing screens today. Or, you know, some people will say like, we try to do Sabbath. And we don't do screens on Sabbath. Yeah. What I have found is with my kids, you know, throughout history with my own kids, and even with other kids, when I've said, you know, no screens or no technology, when they don't have the choice, they will figure it out. Yeah. They will find, and usually it's pretty creative. Right. My son, a lot of times when I'll say no screens, he likes to create his own like sneakers. Like he'll design them and things. And so he'll go and he'll spray paint and he'll do all these things. So I think helping your kids be intentional, like brainstorm with them, make a list. Like I've done these things like where I'll like 5 things that you can do that's not video related or screens. And they'll have to go look at the list and pick it out. So
yeah. But talk to us a little bit more. I'd be interested to hear, in addition to them not being as empathetic as they would be or develop by having, you know, face-to-face contact with people. Yeah. What are some other ways in which technology is impacting our kids?
Yeah, well, I think it goes along with the empathy thing, but kids aren't able to have really good conversations with adults, I've noticed. Because you know, again, I didn't grow up that way, and so I don't want to be judgmental, and I think that there's some good things about it too. But I have noticed, and this is also in the research, you know, that kids don't have as good of conversational skills. They don't know how to ask questions as much, because again, they're not having this in-person, in real life conversations. And so, you know, I know there's also research around, and I don't have the research in front of me, but around ADHD, and because the reward, you know, the reward system with your brain, with the dopamine, they call it getting the dopamine hits. I mean, I notice it myself. You know, like, oh, I got a text. Oh, I got a, you know, it's like your brain gets this little squirt of dopamine, and that is affected. It's more affected our kids' brains. So, yeah, I don't have as much of like the hard data, but I have noticed. Yeah. I have noticed as a culture that kids aren't as interactive.
Well, and, you know, in addition to that, and just in general, you know, access to the internet, it gives them access to this whole world and things.
I didn't even talk about that.
That we wouldn't want them to have or to encounter before they're ready. Not that you would ever want them to encounter any of that stuff, but certainly when they're young, you know, and if they have a smartphone, pornography and images and videos and things like that, that you don't want kids to have access to.
And so I just, you know, I would recommend putting filters on your computers, there's lots of, you know, Apple has a lot of screen settings that you can look into, filters, screen settings. You know, there's like some books out there. I'm trying to remember the name of it. I think it's called Good Pictures, Bad Pictures, which is, I think there's one for young children and then there's one for a little bit older children, but that to help your kids be aware of if they did see something on the computer, like what would they do, what would they say, how can they tell their parents? Also, if they have seen something, you know, this book gets a conversation going. And so our kids are going to, they say that our kids are going to inevitably see something. It's just helping them navigate it. And then, you know, and pornography is huge. And, you know, that's kind of what we all fear for our kids. And the statistics are mind-boggling.
And very scary.
And very scary. And then I would say, you know, it can happen to anyone. And just going back to the training your kids, I think it's not necessarily going to guarantee that they're not going to fall into an addictive behavior, but I think when we in our home life, if we give our kids a taste of the goodness of God, and again, we're not the perfect family, you know, we have our warts, but when we give our kids the taste of the goodness of God, the taste for evil is more bitter, you know, and they might taste it, and it does taste good at first, right? But I think the more that they are in, like, you know, heaven, so to speak, or heaven on earth, you know, in the kingdom of God, the less they're going to want to stray, or maybe, you know, if they do taste of pornography or, you know, different things in the world that are addictive, you know, more easily brought back because they're caught earlier. You know? I do have a friend she would always say, pray that your kids always get caught. Right? Because they can be brought in quicker. They can be corrected quicker and be brought back into the path that God has for them quicker. And, you know, I mean, all my kids have gotten caught in different things, and I'm so thankful. It's the mercy of God. You know?
And I feel like God does that to us too.
Absolutely.
When we, you know, we think we're getting away with stuff, and then we get caught. And it's because of his love for us, right? He makes it blow up in our face.
And then we get to humble ourselves.
right, exactly. But on these last few minutes, I just wanted to ask you a question in terms of the subject of sex, right? And how early to begin to talk to your children about that. And are there any good books that we could recommend to parents to talk to them about, you know, in a sort of a healthy way and in a Christian way, to talk about this very difficult topic?
Okay, I'm not going to be able to remember the names of the books.
But maybe you can email them to me, because I send you know, as a resource. Because we have used, well, actually, we did use some books with our kids, but mostly we just talked to them. That's mostly really how it kind of all happened. And I talked to the girls, and Sean talked to the boys, and it's always awkward. Always awkward. And I don't know if we did the best job, but you know, I think it kind of depends on the kid, on the age. Some parents whose kids are maybe like in a public school setting decide to talk to their kids earlier. You know, I think some parents talk to their kids around 8 or 9. I think we talked to our kids around 10, 11. Our kids were in like private Christian schools, and so we weren't, I'm not saying that they don't always get exposed, but it didn't feel like they were getting exposed, and based on conversations that we had. And I think you can have like fishing conversations with your kids and kind of get to understand what they know and whatever. And so, but when you start realizing they're probably going to hear this from someone else, if I don't tell them first, is when you want to talk to them. And, you know, my husband and I, we tried to be very open in our family about, first of all, we're affectionate, my husband and I would say that's another part of parenting is let your kids experience your romantic relationship. We love this because we would always embrace or kiss or whatever, and especially when our kids were little, they would, like a magnet, they would come and they would kind of join in the party. They would come and hug us, and Sean and I laugh now because our dog does that. Whenever we hug, our dog wants to come and hug. But it brings security. It brings security to your kids when mom and dad are, you know, together. But so I guess what I was trying to say is you know, we didn't shy away from letting our kids know that we had a romantic relationship. And you know, my husband's actually probably more open about it than I am. I'm still a little bashful talking about it with our kids, but now that our kids are older, we can talk about it as a family, and you know, they can make jokes about mom and dad or whatever. But so I think not making it such a taboo subject, as you begin to appropriately introduce things. And just like, this is normal and this is beautiful in the context of marriage, you know, is really, you know, how I just
think how we've talked about it and how I think it can be healthy.
Yeah, and I love that we're kind of coming kind of full circle again towards the marriage relationship, and how critical, as you're saying, right, for the kids to see a healthy, loving relationship in their parents, and that it's, you know, it's normal, it's okay, and then how we started talking about parenting, right? That it's important, as you said, to begin to work in yourself, right? For that couple who's perhaps going to have a child or thinking about children, that it's important to work on the married relationship as they are thinking about parenting.
It's full circle.
Full circle.
Full circle.
I love that. I love that. Any last thoughts to our parents out there that you might want to share with them, Laura, before we sign off?
You know, I would just say, I just have a lot of respect for parents. So give yourself a pat on the back and take a deep breath and, you know, inhale God's grace, because this is His heart and He is for you as a parent. And parenting is hard. It's hard. And I think it's the hardest thing we will ever do. Parenting is the hardest thing we will ever do. And we cannot do it without the grace of God. So, you know, I would say inhale His grace for the journey.
Amen. So those are the last words. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.